Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Sumac virtual training webinar. Thank you so much for signing on today. My name is Rohan, and I'm the implementation lead here at Silent Partner. I'll be your moderator for today's session. Today, we will be covering personalization and customization in Sumac. We'll be touching on user preferences like column choices and appearance settings, and admin-only preferences like choosing which fields and tabs display in your database, customizing drop-down menus, and other helpful preferences. These tips and configurations will help you personalize your database so it works best for you and your team. Before we get into the training, I want to take care of a few little housekeeping updates. For today's session, we have muted all participants' microphones. We have a lot of content that we want to show you, and we don't want to keep you over time. We really encourage you to reach out through the Q&A function. You'll see a Q&A icon along the bottom of your screen. If any questions come in during the session, I'll try to answer them in the Q&A, and if there's time, we may be able to answer some questions live. If anything is left unanswered at the end of the webinar, I'll take your name and your question, and our team will reach out after the session to help you one-on-one. We are recording today's session, and a recording will be made available to all Sumac clients through our online support portal. If you want to share today's session with any of your colleagues who couldn't attend, or if you just want to rewatch the session yourself in the coming weeks, you'll be able to access the recording at any time. Now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Megan, who will be guiding us through today's session. Take it away, Megan.
Thanks, Rohan, and hello, everyone. My name is Megan, and I will be your Sumac tour guide today. I want to say from the top, thanks everybody for attending the session today. I don't know about all of you, but I know that on our team, we had a lot of people going on vacation towards the end of this week and next. So it's nice to see that, quite a few of you made time out of your day during the summertime to make time for the Sumac team and going through all of this. So we really appreciate seeing you all attend. As many of you signing in today likely already know, Sumac is a CRM. It handles contact relationship management for your nonprofit. It stores all your contacts, your donors, clients, staff, families, other organizations, anyone. It also stores the interactions that you've had with those contacts in one place. So you've got a central location where you can see all of your contacts and the one-to-many relationships that you have with each of them. Today, I'll be showing everyone how to personalize Sumac so that it better suits your needs and the needs of your organization. Before we get into the bigger settings that only an administrator can access, I want to first focus on things that can be done by each individual user. There's a lot you can personalize in Sumac so that it fits your preferences. You're probably familiar with the contacts area of Sumac, but I want to show you some of the unique options that you may not know about. So in my console here, I'm going to click the contacts button and bring up my contact list. The first user preference that I want to show you is that you can rearrange the columns that are showing in your data list. Why is that helpful? Because every user of Sumac will have their own priorities and key pieces of information that they want to see when working in Sumac. Your fundraising person wants to see contact information and information about recent donation history, but your membership person wants to see recent membership info and so forth. So in the contact list, click the columns button to the top right of the list here. And that brings up a new window that shows you all of the fields that are available to show as a column on the left. And on the right, you see all the fields that are currently showing as a column. So you can just drag and drop left to right to pick and choose what you want to see here. So let's say, for example, I need to see people's gender as a column in my contact list. I could drag this field over, drop it on the right-hand side, and now gender would show as a column. Another really helpful thing is, as you can see, there are a ton of different fields in the contact list, right? That's a lot of stuff to sort through. But if you know the name of the field that you want to show, you could just start typing that field name up here to find it more quickly. So let's imagine that I am a fundraising person at my charity, and I want to show some columns that relate to my contact's recent donation history. If I just start typing the word donation into this field up here, you'll see that Sumac has filtered down and it has narrowed down the options that are available to show about somebody's donation history. So perhaps I want to see my contact's total number of donations. I want to see the amount of their first donation, and I want to see, let's say, the date of their last donation and the amount of their last donation. Maybe also the total of all their donations. Like, you can drag and drop whatever you like to see. You can also rearrange things. So if I had said, you know, maybe I actually need to see all of these things before even seeing their city information, I could select all of this stuff and just drag it up. So now it's going to show me those things front and center first and foremost. Once you have rearranged everything the way you want to see it, click OK, and Sumac will adjust the columns to show what you want to see. So everything has been readjusted in my contact list, so it's showing me the stuff that I need to see right away. Every single user in Sumac can do this. You can set this, like each of your team members can set what they want to see. They can also do this in every single list of Sumac. So in your donations list, in your memberships list, in your list of case records, you can do all this stuff to pick and choose the things that you really want to see. And it will remember that for you every time that you log in. So the next time I log into the database, Sumac is going to remember that these are the columns that I like to see. It's not going to make me choose those things every single time. So really helpful way to just immediately personalize Sumac to make sure that when you log in, it's showing you the information that's really important to you. Along the same lines, there's another preference that you can set to make sure Sumac is always showing you the things that you care about most. So for this next preference, I'm going to move over to the Add to Contact button in the top left of the contact list. Add to Contact is a button that acts basically as a shortcut to add a new record to contacts for other areas of Sumac. So as an example, if I select this contact here, that makes the Add to Contact button active. And when I click it, you'll see that I've got a lot of options for different types of information that I can add for this contact now. But this is showing me a ton of stuff that I'm never going to use. So rather than being overwhelmed with all of these choices that I don't need, you'll notice that we've got this favorites button in the bottom left, and this lets me customize the options that are available to me. So when I click that, you'll see I can pick and choose exactly what makes sense for me to show. So continuing on with my earlier example, if I'm on the fundraising team and I know that I only ever enter donations and communications, I could adjust these options that are selected and just deselect all these other things that I really don't need. Turn it all off, whatever makes sense. And then when I click OK, Sumac has adjusted what it shows me when I'm adding new information for contacts. So I'm focused in on just the stuff that I really need to see. Or maybe I'm the memberships person, so I need to be able to add new memberships as well. I click that favorites button again, and I just put a check mark next to memberships, and now it's going to show me that as another one of the options here. Or perhaps I'm the volunteer coordinator, so I need to be able to add new time dockets. I need to be able to enter new volunteer preferences, skills, and availability really easily. I could choose all of those options as favorites as well. Whatever makes sense for the type of role I have at my organization, I can pick and choose my favorites so that whenever I'm adding new information for a contact in my database, I'm focused in on the things that really make sense for me to see. So just a simple way to tailor Sumac around your needs and behavior, so you're always focused on what is relevant to you and not a whole bunch of other stuff that you don't really need. So that covers favorites. Another option to personalize your Sumac experience is the ability to actually change some of the appearance options in Sumac. So to show you this, I'm going to close out of contacts. And over here in the main console, I expand the Utilities menu. Utilities is sort of like your toolbox for Sumac. So it gives you all of your back-end tools to tweak Sumac and customize it. And under the Customize Database heading, the first thing you'll see here is Appearance. These appearance options are user specific. So any changes that you make here will affect you and not all of your colleagues. So as a good example, we have a lot of users who have varied comfort with reading on a computer screen. So if you're finding that the font size in Sumac is too small and you're having trouble reading the content in Sumac, there are a few things here that you could try to make it easier to read. You could adjust the text size in Sumac so that it shows you larger text. Or you could try adding more space in list windows, and it'll actually put extra space in between records in Sumac just to make it easier to read. We also have this color scheme down here, which allows you to choose a very high contrast color scheme. It makes everything straight black and white rather than using the different shades of green. So it all just kind of makes it easier to read. So you pick and choose whatever makes sense for you. And then if I click OK, Sumac adjusts that accordingly. If I go into my contact list, you can immediately see the text size is a little bit larger. I've got a little bit more space in between records in my screen. So it's a very nice way to adjust Sumac and just like I say, make it easier to read what's being put in front of you. I'm going to move out of here and go back into appearance because there's one other option that I want to show, which is tooltips. So throughout Sumac, you'll notice as you hover over a button or a value in Sumac, a little tooltip might appear and it provides you with helpful information to just kind of give you more information about what it is you're about to click or the report you're about to run, that sort of thing. If you're a very advanced and comfortable user in Sumac, you might want to hide those tooltips. You don't need to see them and they just kind of take up space on your screen. You don't want to look at them anymore. Just turn them off. Or maybe you're fairly comfortable, but you still want a little bit of help and guidance. Try using a shorter like mini tooltip, just gives you some basic guidance throughout. Or maybe you want, like you're a new user or you just really like to see a longer explanation of things, then you should use the longer full explanation tooltips. Personally, as a user, I like to see a lot of stuff. So I tend to choose smaller text sizes and I don't add extra spacing because it lets me see more records in my list window, but I always use the longer explanatory help information. And for me, the reason I do that is when I hover over a report in Sumac, it will give me a longer explanation of what's in that report. So it just helps me make sure I know that I'm running the right report for whatever I'm trying to do. But as you can see, you can really personalize that around what makes sense for you, for your preferences, for the type of activities and behavior you have in your database. So personalize all of those things as you see fit and click OK for those changes to take effect. So that just about covers what we can do for individual users. Before I move into the admin-only preferences, Rohan, are there any questions in the Q&A that I can help with?
No questions so far. Looks like everything seems crystal clear. So
excellent. That's what I like to hear. That's great. All right. So in that case, let's dive into the admin only preferences. So the difference here is that the admin preferences help you make bigger changes to Sumac. So they make these changes make Sumac work better for your whole team and not just individual team members. So for all of this, I'm going to stay in the utilities menu for the most part, because a lot of the customization options that we're going to use are found here. However, everything from here on out that I'm going to share is only accessible to administrators. So what that means is that you have to be an administrative user, like you have to have the admin privilege to access these options and make changes to these things. If you are a non-admin user joining us today, that's okay. You should still take note of what's possible. If you see something that you think would be beneficial for your team, make note of it and talk to your Sumac admin about setting that up for you. So when we were looking at the contact record earlier, you may have noticed that you can have a bunch of different tabs showing in the contact record here. I'll pull it up as an example. So you can see we've got a bunch of different tabs across the top for storing different kinds of information about somebody. We often find that our clients who have been using Sumac for years, they're not actually using a lot of those tabs, but they didn't know that they could actually hide them. If your organization is not using all of these available tabs, you can hide some of these things that aren't relevant to your organization. And it just makes the contact record a lot easier to look at and focus on. So I'm going to move out of contacts for now and go back to that utilities menu. Under Customize Database, I'm going to go down to the Preferences option and click that. When I click Preferences, this brings up the Sumac Preferences area. And this is basically where you set up the rules for how you want Sumac to behave for your organization. If we stick here on the Contacts tab, you can see that one of my options down here is to choose tab names. When I click that, that brings up a table where I can see all of the tabs that are in my contact record, and I've got some options to hide things that are not relevant to me or rename things that I don't want to use. So for example, let's say I'm not really using the vacation address. My organization never stores vacation addresses for people. I could just put a check mark, or pardon me, an X here in this box to hide it. And now that tab is going to be hidden in my database. Another example would be, I've got a tab for the residence and for the business address. I don't have the ability to hide them, but I could rename them. Maybe I don't work with very many organizations. I don't have a lot of organization contacts in my database, but I do occasionally need to keep track of an alternate address for somebody. So I could just click on business address and rename it to alternate address instead. When I click OK, Sumac saves those changes. And now if I, for that one, you do need to quit and restart Sumac for those changes to take effect. For the most part, if you make a change in preferences, those changes take effect right away. But sometimes some of the changes you're going to be making here are larger, and Sumac needs you to quit Sumac and just restart for it to properly show you that. I'm not going to go through and make you watch me quit and log back into my database right now, but it's as simple as that for making the change and saving it in your database. And as soon as you restart, those tabs are going to be hidden or renamed whatever change it was that you made to that preferences area. Along the same lines, you can actually do something pretty similar with the fields that you may want to hide or rename in your database. So if we go back to the Utilities menu, under Customize Database, one of the other options you see here is called Field Preferences. And when I click that, it shows you all the different areas of Sumac. If I click into one of these areas, so for my example, I'll choose Contact, I click that button, and it brings up some options for contact fields that I can personalize. Again, it lets me hide things if I need to hide them. It allows me to rename things if I wanted to rename any of these fields, or make them mandatory. If I needed to make something mandatory so that you wouldn't be able to enter a new contact without selecting something in that field, you can make this mandatory as well. So that's true for a lot of different areas of Sumac. A good example is in the donations area. Maybe you're not really using the original currency field, so it just kind of makes sense to hide it. We have some organizations that receive donations in several different currencies, and so it's very important for them to keep track of the currency used when they receive that donation. But we have a ton of other organizations that operate in Canada. All the donations they receive are from Canadian donors. That currency field is not very helpful for them. Hide it, and then you don't have to worry about showing it anymore. So you can see that's true for each different area of the database. Just pick and choose what makes sense for you, and then that that change takes effect right away and makes everything in Sumac kind of just more tailored and fit to what makes sense for your organization. Okay, so we have now looked at some of the options for hiding and renaming your tabs in your contact record or fields in the database, but we can also create entirely new fields and tabs that will appear in the contacts area. There's quite a bit of flexibility in contacts. And to talk a little bit more about that, I'm going to focus on lookup lists. So under Customize Database, I choose Lookup Lists. And this area allows you to customize a ton of different fields in your database. Essentially, if you see a drop-down menu or a checkbox group in Sumac, Sumac calls those lookup lists, and this is where you go to customize those things. But lookup lists also let you customize a little bit more. In the contacts area, so the first thing we do here is choose the area that we want to customize. I'm going to go to contacts. And then that narrows down the lookup list options that I can edit. The one I'm going to focus on right now is called extra fields. So what this allows you to do is actually create new fields in your contact record. We have the ability to hide some of those built-in fields, but it's very common for us to work with an organization who needs to track something unique. There isn't already a field for it in Sumac, so they want to add a new field to the contact record to store that information. This is how you're going to do it. So as an example, let's say I need to create a new field to store a contact's Instagram username. I'll explain each of these things as I go down the list, but the first thing I do is I click the New button to add something new. First, we choose the field in the contact record. In Sumac, we are limited to a total of 60 extra fields, 60. So you can have up to 60 extra fields in contact records. So we need to choose which of those 60 we're using here. That's the question being asked. So I'm going to choose the 26th. I've done a bunch of customization in this database, so there's a few custom fields already. Name and dialogues. This is the visible name of the field when we view it in the contact record. So basically, what's the name of the field? How is it going to be presented in the contact record? That's what we're entering here. So I'm going to call this Instagram profile. Just type that in there. The next thing here is name in templates. This is used for the corresponding mail merge code. So if you were ever going to be running a mail merge or a mailing and wanted to merge the content of this field into the resulting letter, we need a mail merge code for it. This is where we give that mail merge code its name. Usually we tend to make this name and templates the same as whatever we've done in name and dialogues, or we'll put like a underscore in between it instead of a space. So for this example, I would probably put it together like that. Now, the next thing here, dialog tab name. This is the name of the tab that this field is going to be displayed on. As you saw a moment ago in the contact record, there's different tabs across the top for storing different kinds of information about somebody. So what Sumac is asking us here is, which tab do we want this field to appear on? As an example, if I wanted to have this show on their residence address tab, I could just type that in there. And now this field would show on the residence address tab. Or perhaps we want a totally new tab for this. We don't want it to live on any of the existing tabs. We want to create a new one. So if that's the case, maybe I would get rid of this and create a social media tab or something like that, where I could add other information, other fields about somebody's social media profiles. So let's do that as my example. Next, we've got entry order. This is the order in which the field should appear on the tab you've created. We usually recommend increments of 10, and that way, if you ever want to edit a tab later on to add new fields in between other ones, you don't have to reorder everything. You can just kind of find space in between. So normally we recommend setting entry orders like 10, 20, 30, 40, just so it's left lots of space in between if you need to rearrange things down the road. And now we've got data type. This is where we decide what type of field this is going to be. So for an Instagram profile, I would probably choose text as my option, but there's lots of different field types that you could use depending on what type of data you're going to be storing here. You could make it a long text field if you need it to be able to store larger notes, a date field, a number, a single checkbox, a drop-down menu, whatever makes sense for the type of information that you are adding. So I'm going to choose text as my example here for the Instagram profile, but whatever makes sense for you, you can make that selection here. Now, this next option is not relevant for a text field, but you could have a formula or a checkbox list that you want to exist here. So I'm going to leave this empty, but if it was, for example, a drop-down menu that we created, we could put all the different values we want to see in that drop-down menu here. Or if you needed Sumac to do some calculations, like add up to other numeric fields, you could put the formula that you want Sumac to use here, and then Sumac can do a little bit of calculation for you. So not relevant for this one, but very helpful in other cases. Now, there's some other options here about making this visible only to certain people, that kind of thing. But for this basic example, this is really all I need to do here. I've given the field a name, I've given it a mail merge code, I've specified what tab I want it to be on, and what type of data it should be. When I click OK, that saves the new field into Sumac, and this change takes effect immediately. So if I close out of Lookup Lists and go into the contacts area, I'll bring up Elaine Davenport, who I used as an example earlier. And you can see there's that social media tab that we just created with the Instagram profile field in place. You can continue on like that as much as you need to continue adding new fields. Just for some examples of other custom tabs and fields I've added in the past, we have some organizations that will use Sumac to keep track of client records in the database. And so they need something like a client profile tab for keeping track of when somebody was referred to their organization, some allergies and medical alerts, intake status, that sort of thing. Or another good example, if I jump over to the residence tab, I created some examples of a Facebook profile or a Twitter profile, a LinkedIn profile, so I could easily keep track of it and access those profiles from right within their contact record. So really neat. Sumac has a ton of fields built in, but like I mentioned earlier, we almost always see that an organization has something unique they need to keep track of where there isn't already a field for it in Sumac. So adding those extra fields to the contact record is just a great way to organize your database and to tailor it to your organization's specific needs. So that covers adding other fields and tabs. So at this point, I want to go back into that customized database area and talk about lookup lists with you a little bit more. So as I mentioned, this isn't just where we create our extra fields, right? We can customize the options found in nearly every drop-down menu and checkbox group all throughout Sumac. The flow of making edits is always going to be the same. You choose the area you want to edit, then you choose the lookup list that you want to make changes to. Down at the bottom, you'll see all of the existing values in that lookup list. You could double click any of these if you need to make changes to them, click new to add a new one, and so forth. So let's say, for example, I want to add a new contact type so that I can create a designation for past client, let's say. All I do is choose the area, contacts, and then I choose the lookup list, contact types. There you can see all of my existing contact types are visible here. And if I want to add a new one, which I do for our example, I click new. Really simple. All I do is type in what I want that contact type to be called into the description field. There are some neat options here as well, like mandatory fields. This is kind of handy, actually. You could say that for certain types of contacts, some fields in their contact records should be mandatory. You use the Add Field drop-down menu here. It shows you all the different fields that are available in a contact record, and you could make, say, the gender or the birthday mandatory, whatever makes sense for this particular contact type. It's not imperative that you use it, but it's very handy to help control user entry and make sure that users don't accidentally save a new client record without filling in the birthday or something like that. But for my example, I'll keep things simple. We'll just give it a description and click OK. So now I have added that contact type to my database. If I close out of the lookup list area and go back into a contact record, we'll keep using Elaine as our example, and jump over to the basic tab. There you can see past client is now showing as a contact type. Sumac will always organize contact types alphabetically. Just because I've only just added the new contact type, it's showing it at the end of the list. But as soon as I restart Sumac, that's another example where restarting really kind of makes the change properly take effect. It'll be organized alphabetically in with the rest of the contact types. So really just that simple. Nearly all the drop-down menus and checkbox groups in Sumac are customized in the exact same way in Lookup Lists. It's an area that your Sumac administrators are going to be quite familiar with. Lots of opportunity to tailor the behavior of Sumac in that area. But while we're sort of on the topic of contact types, there is a little tip that I want to bring up here, segue slightly outside of customization, and actually talk about the status fields over here. So these statuses, I want to tell you a little bit more about them and how they're used. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because I have seen quite a few organizations misuse these statuses or just not realize that they're there and actually create a bunch of contact types for these things, even though those status options already existed. So in this example, I want to mention deceased, moved, and inactive. Those are the ones that I really want to highlight here. If you know that somebody is deceased, or you know that your relationship with somebody is inactive, meaning they haven't donated or volunteered or attended an event or had any other activity with your organization for, say, 3 years or more, you could mark them as inactive. Or if you know that somebody has moved and you no longer have their up-to-date address information, you could flag that in their contact record. What I've seen done occasionally is organizations may not realize that deceased is an option or that inactive is an option. And so they've created that as a contact type instead, but these values already exist for you. Alternatively, I've seen some organizations use this inactive checkbox when only part of the relationship has ended. So a really good example is somebody might be a donor, but they're also a volunteer with your organization. They might decide that they're no longer able to volunteer, so they become an inactive volunteer, but they might still be making donations to your organization. You wouldn't want to mark the entire contact record as inactive because they're still going to be a donor. They're not truly inactive with you. So just wanted to point out what those statuses are. If you have been thinking about that sort of thing and you were looking at contact types as the place to store that kind of thing, don't. Use the statuses that are there for you. They're already built in, but they're also very helpful for a couple of other reasons. If you mark somebody as deceased or inactive, Sumac will actually gray out their name in your contact list. And perhaps even more useful is that these contact statuses can be automatically filtered out when you're doing a bulk email or a mail merge. So you don't have to do a bunch of searches to make sure that you're weeding out deceased or inactive people. So I'll do a quick example of that here. If I were, running a mailing and I needed to mail to these people, let's say, under mail merge, Down here at the bottom, you can see that Sumac is automatically going to filter out deceased, inactive, and moved contacts. If you've been storing that in contact types, you're not going to have this option. You're going to have to manually do a search to filter those people out. Use these statuses. It just saves you work in the long run. So just wanted to point that out while we were on the topic of contact types. Okay, so now throughout this webinar, I've been mentioning that there's a difference between a kind of standard regular user in Sumac and an administrator. And that comes down to user permissions, which is another way that you can really tell Sumac how it needs to work for you and for your organization. So let's talk a little bit about how we create new users and how to set up those user permissions so that it works appropriately for you. I'll move out of the contacts area and go back to that utilities menu. But in this case, it's not really a customization I'm doing. So I'm going to collapse the customized database area and instead expand on Sumac administration. I want to get down to this users command. So when I click users, that brings up a list of all of the current users I have for my database. These are all the people who can log in and access Sumac. Let's say that I've just got a new team member on my team, and her name is Lisa, and I need to create a new user profile for her. I click the new button, and that brings up the user profile. I'll start by giving her a login name, call her Lisa, like that. Now this next field here, contact. I click the little contact icon here, and that would let me find her in my database. So there she is. I've selected her, click OK. And now her user profile is actually connected to a contact record in my database. And what's really neat about that is if it's connected to her contact record, it means that Sumac has a connection to this user's email address. And that lets Lisa use the forgot password function. If Lisa forgets her password when she's trying to log in sometime down the road, as long as Sumac knows what contact she's associated with, as long as it can find her email address, she can click a forgot password button and Sumac can just send her an email to help her get logged in. If you haven't done that type of linking already to tie your users to their contact record, it is a really helpful feature. If you're not doing that, it means that if somebody forgets their password, they're going to have to bug their Sumac administrator. If that person's on vacation, if they're out of office in a meeting, just unavailable for whatever reason, that person is stuck unable to log into the database until they've become available. So it's a really little thing, but it just helps all your users in the long run. So we do recommend tying those things together. Now, down below, you'll see that we've got a row for each area of the database, the different pieces of data or commands that are available in Sumac. And for each area, I can specify whether this user is allowed to view information in this area, edit records in those areas, or delete these things. And in some cases where there's usually an additional restriction or additional level of security needed, we've actually added a new permission, which is the ability to create new records, to add new records to that area of the database. So this allows you to be very specific about what a user can and cannot do in Sumac. So a good example might be that you might have somebody working at the front desk who is able to view and edit contacts. So I could, next to contacts, I give them the ability to edit. It gives me the ability to add and view those things as well. But on the donation side, I don't want that front desk person having any access to donations. So I'm going to leave all of that stuff blank, leave it all restricted, and now that person at the front desk is going to be able to see contacts. They won't be held up doing their work, but that information that I have deemed sensitive or extra secure or just inappropriate for that user to have access to, it's remaining hidden for them. They won't even see a donations button in their console. For the example of Lisa, I want to just show you her as an administrator, just so you can kind of see what that looks like as well. If I scroll down here, you'll see that towards the bottom, that's where this special column comes into play. And there are a bunch of extra special permissions that you can give to a person. So if I want to make Lisa an administrator, I put an X next to the administrator option. And Sumac says, do you want me to give this user all capabilities for all types of records? Yes, I do. And so that saved me a ton of time. You can see it's just given her all the permissions to all the different areas in the database. I could still go through and tweak this if I need to. Like if there's anything I need to keep restricted from Lisa, I could, remove her ability to delete donations, for example. Maybe I want her to do everything else except delete donations, whatever makes sense for the situation. Some other neat special permissions to point out. You could restrict somebody's ability to do bulk editing or importing in Sumac, restrict their ability to duplicate records or to create donation tax receipts or even resolve duplicate contacts. So lots of options to provide access or restrict access throughout the database so that the behavior of all of your users throughout Sumac is appropriate for the work they need to do and what you need to keep protected. So if I click OK, oh, sorry, no, the last thing I need to do, I didn't give her a password. I've got to use the set password button. That's up here in the top right. So I click that button and it's going to let me make a password for Lisa. You can use either your mouse, like kind of have it draw a design as your password, or a keyboard, which is more traditional and what I see most organizations end up using. I'll choose keyboard for my example. I give her a password that's appropriate. And what you probably saw there is there are some things that make your password stronger or weaker. So as you type in the password, Sumac can show you what it's fulfilling, what hasn't been fulfilled yet. So you are setting a password that is strong enough for what Lisa's going to be doing in your database. So if I type that in there, and then I just type my password here, and there we go. I click OK. I've set her password. I click OK. And now I've created Lisa as a user in my database. I can let her log in and do whatever it is that she needs to do in Sumac. There she is. Now, the last thing I want to mention, just on the note of users and permissions and all that sort of stuff, once I've set these things up and have all of these people as users, there is in the utilities menu a change my password option. This is available to everybody, like every user in your database. It's accessible to all users as soon as they have logged in. And what that lets you do is it allows your team to change their own password without having to bug your administrator to do that. So if somebody, wanted to change their password, update it, something like that, they can use the change password button. They don't have to chase down their administrator to get their password corrected in Sumac. So now that we've talked about users a little bit, I want to kind of wrap up our conversation about preferences and customization in Sumac by pointing out some of the most useful options that we have in preferences. We've been into the preferences area already, and I've pointed out a couple specific ones, but we could probably spend an entire webinar going through all of the options found here in this preferences area. But I want to wrap up by pointing out some of the most helpful options that we've seen have a really big impact on organizations in the past. So at this point, I'm going to touch on the contacts tab. When we have these preferences open, you'll see that there are quite a few different preferences for the contacts area. You can control the color that Sumac is going to use for deceased contacts. By default, it's going to be gray, but if you wanted to make that a different color, you can change that if you like. You can also move over to the security tab, and this allows you to set some additional security preferences for your database. So what we see used here most often is this transaction logging feature. So as people are adding things and changing things in your database, Sumac can be logging all of these activities. It's kind of like a database auditing tool. As users are moving around in the database, Sumac can keep track of who is doing what and when. And if you ever need to look back at your logs, you'll have a really solid itemized audit log to refer back to if you need to know kind of what happened in the database. All you do is put a check mark next to the different types of transactions that you want Sumac to be logging. And then moving forward, Sumac's going to record them all for you. And later you can view those transaction logs anytime you need to double check what activity occurred in the database. Another nice thing here, and I find some organizations really need this, especially if they have quite a large number of users. You might want to say that your passwords for your team are going to expire. So that would mean that, you know, after a certain period of time, people who can see payments in the database or are doing sensitive activities in the database have to reset their password. So just lots of security features here. You can kind of really turn up the dial on the security in Sumac if you need to. And we have some organizations where that's quite critical for meeting their compliance needs. A little more practical and relevant to more organizations is over here on the Salutations tab. Again, this is a thing that I see overlooked a lot, but it lets you control how Sumac is going to produce a salutation when you are running a mailing in Sumac. So how do you want Sumac to address somebody in the dear part of a letter? Should it be, you know, prefix and last name? Should it be full prefix, first name and last name? Like, what makes sense? How do you want Sumac to handle the dear part of a letter? Same with the residence recipient. If you want, you know, certain levels of addressing to be more formal than others, you can control all of that here. You set that preference once, and then moving forward, Sumac knows how you like people to be addressed when you're running a mailing, and it'll do that accordingly anytime you run a mailing in Sumac. When I jump over to the country tab, we've got similar options here. You can specify whether Sumac should use state or province in the database. We run into that a lot if you're in Canada versus the United States or in another country. You want to control how Sumac is naming that state or province field in the database. You can also choose your postal standard for mailings and addresses, and phone number preferences as well, just to make sure that everything is being formatted appropriately with regards to your organization's location. Jumping over to the donations tab, there is a ton of stuff that you can set in the donations area. Lots of preferences for donations. Right up here at the top, you can choose if you want to use donation batches or not. If you're not familiar with donation batching in Sumac, basically it allows you to group donations together into a batch associated with a bank deposit. So it's a very nice reconciliation feature. If that sounds like it would be relevant to you and you don't find an option for donation batching today, probably it's just that you need to turn on this preference and then it'll start allowing you to do that. Let us know if you've got questions about donation batching. We've got lots of support articles and our team is always happy to help with that sort of thing as well. But turning that on is really nice for organizations who want to do that type of grouping. You can make donation types optional. By default, they are mandatory, but some organizations really just want that to be an optional feature. It's not necessary for their needs. So you do have the option to make that optional. This one here, set the will never be receipted for donations under a certain amount. So some organizations will only create tax receipts for donations if they are over a certain dollar value. So if it is, say, under $20, you're not going to make a tax receipt for it. So you can put 20 in there. And then as soon as you enter a donation of $19 or less, Sumac will know not to make a tax receipt for it. Further down here in the receipts area, you can specify the next receipt number that should be used in your database. This is really helpful for organizations that are very new to receipting in Sumac. Very likely they've been using another tool to create their tax receipts in their database. And so they've have all of these tax receipts that have been issued outside of Sumac with a certain number sequence. When they switch over to Sumac, they want Sumac to pick up where that previous tool left off. This is how you do it. Just tell Sumac what the next highest receipt number to use should be, and then it'll be able to follow along with that sequence. We've also run into a few organizations who change the sequence of their tax receipts every single year. So it'll be like the first 4 digits of the receipt number will be the year that in which it was receipted, this is another good example of when you would want to come in here and tweak this preference slightly just to push it up to the next year. Now you'll see there's a ton of other preferences that are available down here towards the bottom of the donations tab. All of this is related to website integration for online donations and how you want that to work in Sumac. We do offer web integration for accepting donations through your website. And if you are not already using that feature and you're interested in it, just let Rohan know in the Q&A and we'll get you connected to our sales team so you can talk through your options for that. But along those lines, that does bring me to the payments tab. So along with the website integration info, on the payments tab, this is where you tell Sumac about your payment processor information. So it allows you to actually process payments directly in your Sumac database. I've got a sample IATS. This is not real payment processor information, unfortunately, just our test account that we use for testing. But this allows you to actually, like I say, process payments directly in the Sumac database so that you can streamline all the payments for online donations, for anyone who's phoning in to make a donation, membership payments, anything, all of that can be streamlined through the Sumac database. And the credentials will vary depending on the merchant that you're using. So just if you, again, have more questions about that, let us know in the Q&A. We do also have a lot of resources for this through our support portal, or reach out to our team anytime and we're happy to help with that. One last preference though on the payments tab is down here at the bottom for setting the fiscal start month and day. So this lets you tell Sumac when your fiscal year starts, which is really nice for reporting. There are a lot of reports, especially in the donations area, where you can tell Sumac that you want it to run the report based on your fiscal year as opposed to a calendar year, which is its default. So if you set that preference here, then Sumac will know how to run a report according to your fiscal. And speaking of reporting, there is also a reports tab in preferences too. This is one of our more unique preferences, but it's a really nice touch. On this reports tab, you can upload an image like your organization's logo so that it appears on any reports that you generate in Sumac. You can also set how you want that logo to be justified in the report, and you can set a column preference for headers, a color preference for headers in your report so that it all kind of looks the way that you want it to. So it's just a really nice touch and a way for you to control how reports are going to be displayed when you run them in Sumac. So to show you an example of that, I'll move out of here. And I'm going to go under fundraising and bring up my donations list to show you an example of that. Under analyze and report, the report I'm going to use for my example is under the reconciliation heading. It's called Account and Fund Summary. This is a really popular report for producing to give to your bookkeeper so you can see where donations have come in and where they're supposed to be distributed to. So if I run that report, Sumac's going to ask me for a date range, so I'll go back a year to the same time of 2020 and click OK. So what that does is it brings up all the donations that have been received in that year and what funds and accounts they were allocated to. But you can see it's put my logo at the top. It's got the color for the header of my columns in my report. So right away, it's just like I say, it's a nice touch helping you to produce clean, consistent, professional looking reports. So if you need to give this to your bookkeeper or your board or your fundraising or your executive team, you've produced a really nice looking report in just a couple of clicks. So that I think covers everything I wanted to show you in today's session. But Rohan, again, are there any questions in the Q&A that I can help answer before we wrap things up?
No questions left. I was able to answer a couple of folks, so I think we're good.
All right, perfect. Well, in that case, that was perfect timing. I think we are just coming up on our hour. So great timing, everybody. And thank you all for your time and your engagement as we've gone through this session today. We touched on a lot of different things, covered a ton of ground, and I know we maybe didn't get it deep into all the different areas of preferences that Sumac supports. But if you're the Sumac administrator, dig in there, check out what preferences are available, talk about it with your team, see if there are some things that Sumac can be just kind of doing for you in the background that you didn't know about and take some of the work off your plate. I hope everybody is walking away with some new information, some things that you didn't know about Sumac before that can help make your life a lot easier. Yeah, so thank you again, everybody. And with that, I'll turn things back over to Rohan for a few final housekeeping things.
Thanks, Megan. That was great. And thank you so much to everyone who attended. We will be presenting a series of webinars throughout 2021. If you search for webinar in the self-help portal, you can find a list of upcoming webinars with registration links and recordings of past webinars. So check out the support portal anytime to rewatch a previous session or see what's coming up next. Thank you again for your time, everyone. Whether you joined us for your lunch break, your morning coffee, or took time out of your schedule today, we're glad you joined us. And thank you so much for choosing Sumac. Happy Friday, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend.
Bye, everyone.